question. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, do feel free, or alternatively, we'll be using the chat for comments as we go along, questions, etc. I'm just going to double check. Yeah, so the chat is running. So yeah, do contribute if you want to speak up, or drop a question in the chat and we'll be monitoring it and we'll come along to the chat as we go along. So Dave, do you want to kick off? I've just given a very brief introduction.
So how many we got to, James?
I think we're up to 11 now. So I think that's probably everyone, given that it's 10 past.
Okay.
So if you want to kick off onto slide, probably start at slide 3.
Slide 3. Good man. If I can get to go to slide 3, come on. Oh, well. Every presentation starts with its issues. So, as James says, welcome to the 4th session of the 4 virtual sessions seeking to brief the Jewellery Quarter community and other stakeholders in respect of the emerging neighbourhood plan. Obviously, you've had and maybe been party to a number of sessions already so far. These covering the introduction and big ideas, heritage in the quarter, jewellery and creative industries, of which I believe there's a second take, maybe later on, being rescheduled or tomorrow. So if you've missed that, then certainly try and see that and make sure Mr. Bott earns his crust. So this
you can't see the slides, by the way. Do you want to?
You can't see them.
I can't see this. Yeah, it's just a picture of you at the moment, so you need to share your screen.
Let me try that again. So. Oh, we're having fun, aren't we? You'd think after months of lockdown and challenges that we would be perfect at this. Sorry, apologies for that. Back on track.
So if you want to start slideshow, and then go, start at slide 3 and then hit slideshow.
Yeah. Trust me, James, that is what I'm doing. Batman and Robin.
Excellent. Okay, excellent. Off we go.
Yeah. So we were there. I just finished there. This session, obviously, the JQ plan and the plan making process. Just before we get on to a bit more detail around that, it's just worth doing some introductions to me. James may have done an introduction whilst I was out of the room, picking up some pieces of paper, but. So I'm David Smith, and I was a resident until fairly recently of the Jewellery Quarter. Happy to admit that, having lived in the area for the best part of 15 to 20 years, and certainly on the boundary of Great Charles Street for a period of time. I've been a member of the Neighbourhood Forum in the early days, and then continue to support a number of other residents in the process of making representations to planning applications. Over that duration, so have fairly long-standing roots in the area and interest in the area, having moved fairly recently for family reasons more than anything, but certainly well qualified, I'd like to think, to give some insight to the quarter and support this process. James, did you happen to introduce when I was out of the room?
I just mentioned our names, but yeah, I'm James Mumby. A very similar situation to Dave, having just moved out, well, last couple of years moved out of the Jewellery Quarter, but yeah, likewise with Dave, very much. I lived in the quarter for about 10 years and very much kind of invested myself in the future of the quarter and the development of the plan, and a keen interest in the local area and kind of a thriving mix of everything that the Jewellery Quarter is. So yeah, very similar.
We both have a bit of planning experience, but not necessarily neighbourhood planning experience. So throughout the process, we've offered a little bit of that expertise and support to the Neighbourhood Planning Forum, and also to support representations to applications along the way. But we're by no means qualified experts in neighbourhood planning, and therefore, if we don't have, as we go along, we don't have the answers to your questions, then apologies for that. But if we have the questions in the first place, that would be great. and we can then either try to answer them or defer and provide you with a more robust and fuller answer outside of this forum. So in terms of the ground that we're going to cover, obviously the sessions around the plan and its role in decision making and the planning process in the Jewellery Quarter. And we felt it was probably important to give a bit of insight into the plan making and the decision taking process more generally, before we talked about neighbourhood plans, their scope, their role and their benefits. Then we thought we would just touch very briefly, for those that may be interested, in the implications of the planning white paper, which was recently published by the government and has some fairly radical ideas and implications for planning full stop. So we thought it was important people understood, is this process going to survive, and why should I get involved? So we'll touch on that before having discussion at the end, but as James alluded to, stick your hand up and flag any questions along the way. I think it would make for a more enjoyable and conversational session if we can do that. James, just as a bit of context, would you mind just picking up, and a reminder, perhaps not for those who haven't been party to any sessions so far, what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may have been aware from your reading of the plan so far, if you've had the chance to digest it, that it has an overall vision, which is for the Jewellery Quarter to be a successful community of businesses and residents with jewellery and designing, making it at its heart. It will foster a creative approach to conservation whilst demanding the highest quality design for new development, and will stimulate the vitality of the area by making it easier to get around and giving people a reason to stay. So that was a vision that was developed by the Neighbourhood Planning Forum, considering all the kind of aspects that we wanted to include within the plan, and looking forward how we would like to influence the quarter going forward. And then there's a series of goals which we aim to achieve in kind of delivering that vision. So, as it says on the slide, enabling businesses and residents to coexist. That's always been a key part of the success of the Jewellery Quarter, and it's something I think we've all experienced, which gives its unique character and kind of quality. We wanted to drive up the quality of new developments and also avoid dereliction, which has been a kind of long-standing problem in the quarter for kind of 20 years and more, really. And the protection of heritage and beautiful buildings, jewellery and creative industries and allied activities, which again kind of make the quarter what it is, and facilitate wider projects needed to support the growth and vitality of the Jewellery Quarter. So building on its current character and kind of making it a more appealing place in the future, and helping businesses to thrive. Urban realm and public realm is a very important part of that. So there's a few projects which you may have noticed in the plan itself. And just to say, the neighbourhood plan has been written by the community for the community. So our efforts over the last few years are very much to support the quarter as a whole, business and residents, and to continue to make it thrive, basically. Yeah.
We do. It's important to stress that we do want it to be representative of as many interests as possible, which is why we're undergoing this process and a series of sessions to tease out as many thoughts, views, and opinions from anybody that's prepared to engage. So it's not just the plan of those people on the call or the previous session calls or Zoom sessions. It's actually a plan we want the community to engage in. So that's the first part of the context, I suppose, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, what we think the community will want to achieve. The second sort of operating context, I suppose, is a little bit drier, but important to understand in terms of what we're operating within. And there are three key areas that we've identified in terms of what has a bearing on planning in the Jewellery Quarter. One is the National Planning Policy Framework, and for those that are not familiar with that, that is what it says on the tin. That's a document written at government level, which provides a framework within which locally produced plans can be prepared. And that document sitting at the top has to be taken into account when local authorities or any other body is preparing a plan. It also has to be taken into consideration when planning applications are being determined, and we'll come back to that briefly. That national level guidance is interested in the pursuit of sustainable development and has 3 independent or interdependent objectives around economic, social and environmental objectives, all of which have to feature heavily in the consideration and the preparation of plans. So it has a wide range of matters that are covered in it and to be taken into account, and some of them are relevant to the JQ plan, whether it's about designing the good places and effective design, making good use of land, or heritage and environmental considerations. But it sits there as a document, much streamlined from previous planning legislation, that we have to be aware of. The second element is the heritage considerations and statutory duties. So these aren't just guidance, this is statutory obligations in the pursuit of development, and that probably comprises 2 things in this case: listed buildings and conservation areas. So the plan can't sidestep or dilute the statutory requirements to pay attention to either preserving listed buildings or their settings, and also in the case of conservation areas, paying attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character of the character or appearance of the conservation area. So heritage obviously is massively prevalent, without overstating it or stating the obvious in the Quarter. Many listed buildings, and obviously quite a comprehensive conservation area, although doesn't entirely co-align with the neighbourhood planning boundary, which moves over into the eastern side of Constitution Hill, Great Hampton Street. The third element really to take note of, I suppose, is permitted development rights, which have caused or been the subject of much debate in recent years in the Jewellery Quarter, whether it is the ability to change uses, in particularly from office to residential, or employment land to residential, and there are a number of examples of where that's caused real tensions in the local area, not least, for example, 1,000 Trades and adjoining premises there. And then related to that is also physical works and alterations, certain things that you can do without the need for planning permission, much restricted in conservation areas and with listed buildings, but nonetheless they still exist. We've also got changes or emerging changes in permitted development rights, with the ability to go upwards as well as sideways and backwards, which is part of the government's ambition to squeeze, I guess, as much out of the urban area that it possibly can, and the built-up area, which will no doubt have unintended and not necessarily happy consequences. But those are part of the operating context that we've got, if you like, for preparing and then using this plan as we go forward. James, do you want to pick up on plan making, please?
Yeah. So you may be aware that the planning system operates as a plan-led system, and in this case, in Birmingham, the current local plan or development plan is the Birmingham Development Plan. It's several years old. I can't remember the actual date it was adopted. David, was it 2017 or something? But it's fairly recent. And Birmingham has quite a kind of complicated system of a hierarchy of documents, but essentially they all work together within a plan system, and then decisions on planning applications are made in accordance with that development plan primarily. And the key thing about decision making is it's made in accordance with the development plan unless there are other material considerations that may indicate otherwise. So there is that ability to deviate slightly, and policies within the development plan all pull in different directions. So the planning system is and determination process is a balancing act very much, but the development plan is there as an overall guide, and policies may be given different weight depending on what they cover and also how they apply to the development. So the plan system in Birmingham, we have the overall development plan and then a series of kind of supplementary planning documents and guidance documents, which carry various weight and cover different aspects of development. So our neighbourhood plan would slot into that plan making, into that plan hierarchy. So it would become a statutory policy document that would sit alongside the Birmingham plan itself. And I mean, plans do take a long time to develop, to go through drafting and then become adopted eventually. And throughout that process, there's a series of opportunities for engagement. But the longer those kind of processes go on, it can make the engagement process quite kind of stretched out, and just the timescales and the evidence base that are required to develop these plans do make it complicated and complex process. And we put at the bottom, it can be impenetrable sometimes. I think communities may find a kind of the difficulty of really influencing what would have been kind of the normal local plans back in the day. But since the adoption of and the drive towards neighbourhood planning, that's certainly given a better opportunity for local communities to influence kind of plan making and policy. So obviously we've taken that opportunity in the quarter to hone in on the issues that are important to us, and kind of slot in a series of policies we hope that will become part of that overall development plan. So that's how the plan fits into the wider kind of decision making context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add, James, that of all the layers of plans to engage in, this is hopefully the most straightforward, which is why we're really encouraging people to get involved. It's tangible, it's relevant, and collectively will hopefully make it understandable. Trying to influence, the Birmingham development plan or Birmingham plan, where there's a whole raft of more strategic issues. It's important, but actually it's harder to engage with and harder to get success. So we have a plan level here that's hopefully fit for what we want to achieve, and a bit more accessible and hopefully therefore understandable. So that was plan making, and just a little bit about that. I suppose we also wanted to just touch on decision taking, because I think it's important people understand the amount of work that goes into progressing, preparing, and ultimately determining a planning application which can affect change in the quarter, and how the plans that James has previously referred to, particularly the Birmingham plan, are then used, and then going forwards, obviously how the Jewellery Quarter neighbourhood plan itself will be used, as I say, going forwards. There are many stages, and on behalf of the community, albeit sometimes maybe not seen to be representative of everybody, we have had a continuing involvement in planning applications, and we've tried through the Planning Consultation Committee, which, as I say, was born out of the Jewellery Quarter Neighbourhood Forum, to influence and engage in the process, whether that's been through the pre-application processes, where developers are in the early days of thinking about what they want to achieve with a particular site or property, and they're encouraged to come and talk to ourselves, to the consultation committee, to the JQDT, more particularly now, is leading that initiative, so that we can offer local insight, knowledge, expertise, and really start hopefully the beginning of a successful dialogue with developers. Obviously then there's the public consultation phase, where we can get engaged in that as well. That's more broadly, whether it's exhibitions or online consultation, as it is at the moment in the main, leading to formal submissions, extensive planning applications, which can often be themselves impenetrable and difficult to engage with, and take an enormous amount of time to pick through, to review, to audit, and to then respond to and affect change. The following stages really are more procedure with the City Council, and not often do we get a lot of chance to influence, but the officer has to then prepare their report to committee, and as you can see there in just a snapshot of Birmingham City Council's planning committee as it was. I think it's moved on somewhat from then in terms of digital, But we are then in the hands of a series of elected representative members who are nominated to a planning committee through their respective parties to understand how proposals fit or sit with the policies that they've got in front of them, make a decision. And I suppose the 2 points I would want to make out of this overview of decision taking is, we want to have a plan that reflects our needs in the first place. So if we've got a plan that does that, then the hope is that the decision-making process will be better for us and will be more geared to what we want to achieve in the jewellery quarter. So I'd like to think less time and effort involved in trying to influence that process. James, do you want to just pick up on some of the outcomes?
Yeah, so I think so. By this slide, we were kind of focusing on outcomes of processes that either have happened in the past, leading to what we might consider poor development outcomes or poor decisions as a kind of as a community point of view, or things that have happened over recent years while the plan's been developing, but we felt that the lack of a plan in place has restricted our kind of not achieved the vision that we're hoping to set out for the quarter. And so I guess it's a kind of look ahead that if we can improve some of these aspects with the development of the plan and having the plan in place in terms of policy, then it should lead to better outcomes overall. So I think what we found is possibly lack of resource at the City Council in decision making has led to some less desirable outcomes, and a lack of a kind of consistent community voice. That has improved with the consultation committee that David's touched on. That has provided a kind of central point, a group within the quarter that has been able to give that consistency in terms of commenting on planning applications and development proposals, etc. So that has got better, but and certainly I think a lack of influence in decision making has prompted the need for having a bit more kind of policy clout, if in some ways. And then obviously there's examples of unsatisfactory outcomes over the years in terms of what we see on the ground. I think Heritage Court and possibly Quartz are examples of less desirable outcomes of development than we look back at those and think that there's certainly improvements that we could have made to those, or the need to avoid similar developments in the future. But I think that those outcomes of the planning system as it's been operating to date have kind of spurred us on to develop the plan, hopefully improve some of those aspects. I'm just going to double check the chat. I think we've got one comment from Joel, who's asking, will the new JQ Planning Consultation Committee replace JQDT consultation? Well, the consultation committee has been running, it's probably about 5 or 6 years, hasn't it, David? And so, I mean, they are the same thing, essentially. The consultation committee represents the JQDT. So when the JQDT makes comments on planning applications, which we and others have been involved in, it's the consultation committee which is basically representing that body and putting together comments and submitting them to planning officers. So they are the same thing. So no, the consultation committee won't replace JQDT consultation. Anything to add on that, Dave?
No, I think that's a fair summary. I mean, in the early days, it was very much a group of like-minded people who wanted to do their best to influence the process, and obviously it had a much broader spectrum of involvement. It had developers, it had community representatives, and even to a degree some political insight or involvement as well with ward members. But that's changed, it's evolved. The infrastructure has become more sophisticated. The JQDT is obviously now in place, and there are a group of people that largely led by Matt Bott, who kind of galvanises those people to take time to look at those applications and then feed through to him as the regular conduit to the City Council our thoughts and recommendation to the JQDT. So it's not crystal clear, and that's partly because of the way it's sort of grown organically. And as we go forwards, I dare say, that might be refined to reflect we have a plan in place, and a key part of the challenge once you get a plan in place is making sure that it delivers the outcomes you want. So it doesn't stop there, and we'll touch on that in a moment. So that I suppose that is quite a lot of context, but it gives you an idea of the, as I call it, the operating context, the things that influence what we can do, what we can't do generally to this point. But then 2011, the government obviously, it won't have been obvious to many, if any of you, but the government obviously introduced the Localism Act. And that was, I guess, in recognition of the many issues and frustrations around the sort of hoarding. I think they described it as the hoarding and concentration of power. And so the Localism Act sought to introduce some reforms, which amongst other things were trying to make the planning system more democratic, to give the local government and local communities more rights and freedoms, which I think is another phrase that's used. And as I say, one specific element of that is reform to the planning system. And you can see the quote there, one of the aspirations of the government, taken from the Plain English Guide to the Localism Act, which if you're ever at the loose end is probably just worth as a point in time understanding what the government were trying to achieve. But essentially local communities should have a greater say in what happens in their area. So specifically that leads to neighbourhood planning, one of those key areas where greater rights and freedoms were to be achieved, and to make that process more democratic and make it more effective. Now I can't actually move. You can see the quote at the bottom there, which is worth reading in its entirety. That's the intention of neighbourhood planning, giving communities direct power to develop shared visions for their neighbourhood and shape the development and growth of their area, able to choose where they want new homes, shops and offices to be built, have their say on what buildings should look like and what infrastructure should be provided, and the granting of plan permission for new buildings they want to see go ahead where their ambition is aligned with the strategic needs and priorities of the wider local area. I've just highlighted there, or we've highlighted two key words, shape and alignment. And that's quite important in terms of, again, some of the constraints around neighbourhood planning. It's really important to understand that it in general shapes growth. It can't prevent it. The government didn't introduce this legislation for the lowest level to frustrate the delivery of development on the ground, but it recognised that people were frustrated with what they were seeing on the ground. So we still have growth to deliver as part of the City Council's overall strategic requirements, whether that's housing, employment or other things, but we can shape that growth. We can shape where it is to a degree, we can shape how it manifests itself, and we can shape its appearance and the design quality. And that also relates to the second point, which is the alignment with higher order plans. And so when James was describing earlier on how the planning system is set up, or certainly the local plan is set up, it's that hierarchy of the national planning policy framework. Then we have the local Birmingham plan, which sets out some strategic and other policies, either spatial or specific development types. But then the neighbourhood plan has to a degree, fall in line with, well, it does have to fall in line with those strategic policies, but it gives that local flavour. So we've said there in terms of, so why do this? How does it help? Well, it's really about us defining our priorities, putting that flavour, putting that local flavour into the plan making process, and therefore the decision making process. And we can have policies that are general across the area, or we could have policies that are site specific. It's worth saying that this particular neighbourhood plan is relatively unique in that it's a business neighbourhood plan. given the predominance of industrial industry in the area. Of course, residents form a significant part of the population and the activity now, but it's tipped into the business neighbourhood plan bracket because of the predominance. James, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So we've got Neil Black would like to speak and make a couple of points. So Neil, do you want to come in? Or was it Niall? Hello. Sorry, if I might have got your name wrong.
It is Neil.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Neil Black, local resident. My concern is that there are some pretty strong rules for the conservation area, and yet a developer comes along and is allowed to ignore those. The sort of centre of the Jury Quarter rules state that no more than 4 stories, and yet in the A. Harris site, 5 and 6 stories have been allowed. They're allowed to throw a bit of money at it and the whole thing goes out the window. I don't see how the neighbourhood plan is going to help that. You know, we need to be stronger on this. We need to have a community together to sort of fight this, because once that starts happening, you end up with the heritage court effect.
Yeah. I think certainly that's one that we've looked at over a number of years. A. Harrison did make comments to that effect about building heights. I think we've also, I mean, that area of the quarter was derelict and had development proposals for a long time, and so obviously we wanted to see things come forward. But yeah, we wanted to for the development where possible to try and maintain those story heights, like you mentioned, in line with the conservation area kind of management plan and the current policies. I think when we looked at those proposals, I think as a committee we were flexible in breaching, for want of a better word, the 4-story rule in certain areas where there was a kind of design justification and where it made a statement or helped to provide things like commercial floor space or try and create active frontages. So I think we've always looked to support that flexibility, but only where the kind of the quarter is getting something out of it and it's making an improvement overall. I think the plan still is tight on the 4-story rule and still maintains that, but there is still that flexibility for individual development sites to take a kind of contextual approach to development and where they provide a very good justification for going higher in terms of stories, and again providing those benefits that really benefit the quarter. Then I think it's something we've put in the plan that we would entertain. I think the key things we wanted to get across in the plan were things like affordable workspace, certainly providing improved workspace for local creative industries and jewellery, kind of incubators where people, students coming out of school of jewellery can set up, that kind of thing. So if a development was suggesting going higher in order to create that floor space, and if it was a viability issue they were approaching it from, then I think it's something that the plan looks on reasonably favourably. So, but as always, it's kind of each scheme on its merits, and obviously the design of the scheme is something that we're pushing home. We want to have design and much better design quality as well. So yeah, I think definitely understand where you're coming from. It's certainly something that us and the consultation committee and the neighbourhood plan group have been well aware of. Dave, have you got any?
Yeah, it's really thorny. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head to a degree. It's a really thorny issue, and clearly often a bone of contention between the development industry, to a degree, the local authority, and then the community and its needs and what it wants to see, because every scheme, pushes the boundary as much as it can, and we're not diluting that at all in here. But I think there's an understanding, as James has alluded to, that there does, in some instances, need to be a bit of a give and take to achieve the best out of development. So I think the plan is putting in there, and then the accompanying design document is quite clear. It is by exception There are always exceptions. What we've got to make sure is that the exceptions are worth it when they happen, and that they don't become the rule. But it has been a real issue as long as I've lived, and others will have lived in the quarter, protecting the character, and protecting the story heights. Is a real difficult area, and with clever design, sometimes it's highly appropriate to just have a little, to have parts of the scheme that are accentuated with a story, or other architectural devices that just go above that 4 stories. So it's, as I say, point well made, understood, and I think if the collective will through this process was for it to be stronger than it's currently drafted, then that's something that will go into the feedback, and could be made stronger. But there needs to be an awareness that if schemes need a little bit more give, then it might frustrate those if we're too absolute. But it's a good point, Neil. Good question.
There are a number of issues that come out of it, because they've allowed to have 3 metre floors, which basically means they're looking to put more floors in the future. That's a huge hole. So I think that's something that needs to be sort of looked at and stopped.
Yeah.
And also, you've got the danger that you've got the main area of the jewellery quarter. If you split it between 2 areas, is that going to sort of actually sort of water it down? And also with COVID and the rest of this coming through, I'm not sure how viable that is going forward.
Yeah, they're all fair points again. The floors one in particular, of course, you make a very valid point that floor to ceiling heights, you can play all sorts of games with how many floors and floor to ceiling heights. Then, in due course, even if you were that cunning, you could go back and fill some of those floors in. But so those are very well made, Neil, and we'll certainly be taking those on board. And I've not seen all of the other sessions. I've been party to one of them, but I understand it's a reoccurring theme. So. Something that we'll be reflecting on. I mean, I would say one thing that I'm quite keen on that the plan will try to stamp out on is the appreciation of context which people often do exploit by taking their reference point to the highest building in that context, and then suddenly suggesting that it's appropriate that they push higher and higher. All that will do is continue to build up and up as everyone takes their reference point from each other. So I'm pleased that we're proposing something that is quite strong on that.
Thanks. Did you have any other points, Neil? But John Paddington he'd also like to make a comment about floor heights. But Neil, did you have anything else?
Not on heights. I mean, I love the BT building, so I'm not anti-height. It's just got to be appropriate. There's other points I'd like which are not appropriate for this part, but later in the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. John, do you want to come in?
Yeah. I was interested about the floor heights one. It's actually one of the things I commented on, because I've given some comments on the plan, but I submitted electronically. I understand where Neil's coming from. I suppose I think, and actually hearing you talk about the floor heights thing, I'm more comfortable with it. My personal view is I thought four stories is a bit restrictive. And I appreciate, and I think one thing that concerns me a bit about the plan sometimes and the area is that what we shouldn't be limited by what it is always what it has been. And this has been an industrial area, and it was built because that was what was best at the time. And I think for me, we're a city centre location. We should be encouraging where appropriate, and I think it's appropriate to go a bit higher to accommodate more people living in the area. But it needs to be balanced, and I think, and this is all the points everyone's making, Rich. So that was just a thought of mine. So I just wanted to say that because, and also I worry slightly that the people that comment on these kind of things are the most passionate, whereas a lot of people who live in the area might not be as bothered. And I don't know how we deal with that generally. But
I think it is striking a balance, and like I said, it's this quarter is so varied, and it's a contextual thing as well. One street to the next is different. You have different aspects, different views, sight lines, and things. So sometimes you can make that, you can use that flexibility to bring a new approach, or do something that's quite different. And I think the plan is trying to enable that, but keeping that general principle that 4 stories has been the kind of traditional maximum. And it's for developers, developments to kind of justify where they want to deviate from that. And it's all in the planning balance, what's weighing up all the positives and the negatives. So no, some good comments, thank you. Should we move on to the next slide, Dave? So we've got up here.
Yes, yeah. So I think you probably already, well, you did cover it in the introduction, James, in terms of the vision and 4 of the key goals. But it's just a reminder here about, I suppose, what our plan is essentially trying to do. And as I said, it's not a growth focused plan necessarily. It's not anti-growth, but we're not specifically identifying locations for development specifically of any particular type. It is certainly keen to deal with the successful coexistence of uses, because that's a perennial issue that we've had over the years in looking at planning applications, whether it's bars, nightclubs, and residential, and how those things can better exist. And we've never had a satisfactory, in my eyes, solution to that. And what this plan is trying to do is to give greater strength where it can to the original use. So people pay much closer attention to how they can, when they're delivering residential or other uses, how they can actually mitigate any harm. And I think that's really important, because we do want those, we do want a successful, vibrant, mixed use area, and we don't want it to be at the expense of some of those great business premises in particular that we know and love in the Jewellery Quarter, and a part of what it's all about. So coexistence of uses is a key area for this plan. We've touched on, I suppose, to a degree, that the building heights and promoting and safeguarding distinctiveness and heritage, and then a quality and well-connected place. So quality design and well-connected are key features. But for me, and I think the guys working on the plan, we're trying to have a set of progressive and what I describe as progressive and pragmatic policies, whilst respecting some of the points, for example, that Neil's raised in terms of building heights. We don't want this to be a free-for-all at all. There's too much at stake for it to be a free-for-all. But we do want to have some policies which are a bit more progressive, a bit more creative, and achieve things that the previous plans before haven't tried to achieve. Try to extract that business space that's needed, that designer maker space, alongside any development that may come forward, and make it affordable as well, and the right type of space in the right place. So very much we think and we hope that people will see some of those policies as being progressive, pragmatic and balanced. James, did you want to pick up on ultimately how the plan will be used and why we think it's going to be a better outcome? Yeah.
So because it's very specific and community based, with obviously community-based policies and a vision and shared goals, we do think the plan will be a better kind of starting point for the development industry, and it will be the first kind of port of call for developers and people with proposals to look at and get a clear understanding of what is the policy environment in the quarter kind of now, and what is the community looking to do going forward. So hopefully it will provide a better understanding of the area and the policy environment, but also give encouragement to having a clear encouragement to developers and having a clear understanding of what they can and can't do. So I think in the past we've kind of got the flavour that has been a difficulty sometimes. Developers not really understanding exactly what are the kind of rules of engagement, what are the grounds they can really push on to get development in. So we hope it's going to be a good starting point. It will be used by the planning committee in decision making, and obviously planning officers. It will be applied alongside all the other policies that I outlined earlier in the Birmingham Development Plan, and it will also be relevant for planning appeals. So if applications are refused and applicants take them to appeal the policies will form part of the decision-making process at appeal by an inspector. So again, it's applied policy to the appeal environment, and that could be by way of kind of appeal hearings or an inquiry, or kind of on a written reps basis. So it will apply equally in all those different procedures. We hope it's going to influence better outcomes and raise the game basically in the jury quarter. And hopefully it'll take time to bed in, and hopefully we'll start to see the impact of those policies coming through in decision making over the coming years. It's going to require local councillors, those who sit on the planning committee, to have a good understanding of it, and get their kind of head into the kind of space of the community and the neighbourhood planning environment. There's only one other adopted neighbourhood plan in Birmingham, I think, at the moment, and so they should be aware of the neighbourhood planning kind of agenda. But this one, I think, will be, because it's a residential and business plan, it will require a lot of understanding, and hopefully we as the kind of local community, the Jewellery Quarter Development Trust, can have some input into that through briefings, etc. And it's going to need continued scrutiny. It's going to need kind of monitoring. How effective is it? Is it producing the outcomes that we wanted? Is it influencing some of the kind of side projects that we've put in there, like the nodes and public realm improvements? Is it working? Is it kind of helping our ability to maybe attract funding, kind of grants and community infrastructure levy funding that we'll come on to in the next slide. So there's a lot of monitoring to do. It doesn't just kind of sit on a shelf and stop. It's going to be kind of evolving process, and eventually there'll be a kind of review period to see if we need to change some of it. So that's a kind of snapshot of how it will be used going forward, hopefully from adoption.
It will only be as good as the people that are applying it. So in that respect, it's a similar system that we're working with, but hopefully if we've got better policies in the first place, more understandable policies, and we've got members that understand, as I say, themselves understand those policies, you would like to think that we might get some better and more robust outcomes. Just a small point on the better starting point for the development industry, James. I mean, you'll know, having worked as I have done in this world, that delay is what developers really don't like. Delay and uncertainty. And one of the interesting things around the design document that accompanies the neighbourhood plan is, one of its key statements is this document will help you get planning permission. And I really quite like that, because that's saying is you listen to us, follow the logic of the quarter, follow the important principles of the quarter, follow this document, and you'll have a more straightforward, I'm not going to say an easy ride, but you'll have a more straightforward ride. And hopefully that delivers the outcome for promoters of development in the quarter more quickly, which is in their interests. So it's upfront, it's pretty clear, I think, in quite a candid way. So I do quite like that refreshing honesty. Yeah, James, you touched on the other benefits that having a plan could deliver.
We've had a few more comments before I go on to the next slide.
Sure.
So Neil's made a couple more comments. Neil, if we can pick those up in our discussion section at the end, you could elaborate on what you put down in the chat. Thanks for that. I'm just conscious of time. It's almost 6 o'clock, but I think we'll be happy to kind of go another 10-15 minutes if people want to stick around. And Lawrence has asked about the current government proposed changes to planning system in the white paper. So David is going to pick that up in a slide in very soon. So I'll just cover briefly the benefits in terms of community infrastructure levy, and then David will come on to planning reform. So David, once you've run through planning reform, Lawrence, if you want to ask any further questions, please come in once David's just run through the slide. But the current slide is just indicating that the community infrastructure levy that's in place, once the plan is adopted, it actually gives the opportunity for the neighbourhood plan area to receive directly 25% of community infrastructure money from development in the quarter. So at the moment, whilst it goes to the local authority, it doesn't necessarily come back to the quarter, but that would change with the adoption of the plans. That's a real benefit, and that gives the opportunity for the neighbourhood plan area, the community, to target some of our kind of projects in terms of nodes and public realm improvements. So the plan's not just kind of policy aimed at developers and development proposals. It's also signalling kind of improvements that we would like to make and the community would like to make, kind of putting a marker in the ground. And the policies hopefully will give the ability to focus any funding that we can get from things like SIL to specific projects and give that kind of weight to targeting certain things. So it's a real opportunity there. And we said, I mean, it's an aspirational plan with the inclusion of various nodes, which I think gives some encouragement to future kind of improvements and also asking developers to kind of contribute to those improvements as well. So and certainly something that community can take ownership of, using those financial benefits and push forward with.
How that works remains to be seen. Obviously, James. I mean, we're with a nod to the next slide and nearly, well, it's the penultimate slide. People might be pleased to know, but that levy in some shape or form will exist as we go forward. Although, as I say, the white paper is introducing some fairly radical change, but that there will be some form of levy, and there is a commitment that the neighbourhood plan areas will retain or receive some of that income. And I think where we've got to going forward to get clearer on is obviously who retains it and how it's administered to the benefit of the projects that we're flagging in the neighbourhood plan. So certainly work in progress there. So just briefly to kind of round up, I suppose, as I said at the beginning, you can't do a presentation around neighbourhood planning but without acknowledging that there is some fairly radical reform around the corner, with the government currently consulting on planning for the future. Now, there's a lot of debate, conjecture, and discussion at the moment about how feasible some of the changes in that document are, and the approach that's been adopted. But I think most importantly for us, neighbourhood planning is definitely here to stay. So clearly that would have been a worry had we spent so much time getting to this point, and then finding that the government has decided that it doesn't trust local communities at all, and it's, you know, pulling up the drawbridge. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, you know, there is a role for neighbourhood planning. Just as a point of principle, one of the potentially contentious areas of the planning reform is the approach to how it simplifies where development should happen and how it can happen, and it identifies areas for growth, areas for renewal, and areas for protection. And we're assuming that the jewellery quarter would probably sit within the renewal, because it's not within the growth, as in a major growth location, and it's not greenbelt, which is where we think, and other environmental designations perhaps, that the protection element is trying to deal with. So my assumption is that it would sit within the, you know, the renewal area, which is you know, continually changing and subject to infill and redevelopment, so on and so forth. And there are different approaches for development and how development is handled in each of those locations, with effectively, you know, outline permission granted in certain areas, other development granted with caveats in others, and then development resisted but by exception in areas of protection. And what we need to just focus on and be clear on is what the implications of the planning reform might be for the jewellery quarter. But because I think of its layer of restriction it's already got with the conservation area and with listed buildings, I think we're reasonably well protected from some of those changes, but it's certainly something we'll be looking at going forwards. One of the really promising proposals, I would say, from what's emerging from that consultation is the enhanced role in the design process and the control of development and the design of development, with the suggestion that communities should really get much more involved in design guides and design codes. Now, I think we're ahead of the game here, because a lot of work has been put into preparing the design document that accompanies the neighbourhood plan, with a collaboration of City Council, local architects, local residents, some input from people with planning knowledge. and it's where we think, you know, the neighbourhood plan can make a difference, and really deliver improved design outcomes. So I think we are in a good place there, in terms of the reform supporting exactly that kind of input from communities. More effective engagement is another area, certainly more digital engagement, which is going to be, well, we're seeing it now in terms of the situation that we're in, and the importance of more innovative ways of communicating with each other, but also commenting on planning applications, which I say can be pretty challenging. So more effective engagement is certainly supported there, and being given the tools to do that with local authority support is a really positive move as well. Just one note of caution, as I understand it, the reforms are considering sort of streamlining local plans, so streamlining the likes of the Birmingham Development Plan, which runs to many pages, and taking some of the policy detail out of that, and effectively delivering national standardised policies, if you like. Now, that's potentially concerning, in that it's going to sort of standardise policies across the board, across the country. So what might that mean for the nuance and the emphasis in the case of the jewellery quarter remains to be seen. But overall, I think we should be pleased, or at least after all this effort of getting to this point, be satisfied that neighbourhood planning will be retained. And certainly the government's expectations for how communities can engage in that are aligned with some of the key things that we're doing at the moment. So that effectively is the ground that we wanted to cover. So I really hope that we'll come to some of those questions in a moment, James, if you can see them. But I do hope that that's given a reasonably sufficient sort of overview of the framework we're working within in preparing this plan. Some of the challenges that we've had to face not having a plan, so the benefits of having a plan in place, and the importance of getting everybody in the community to engage in this, to make sure it's representative as possible, as we sort of move forward to the next stage of consultation. This is known as the Reg 14 from memory consultation, the draft consultation. There'll then be a more formal document, the final document, if you like, consultation in due course, and thereafter the document being submitted for consideration by an independent inspector, and obviously the referendum, which is a simple 50-50. All those eligible to vote, we need over 50% of the vote for it to come into force. So there's some way to go, and some of the conversations to this point on this session have flagged some areas of concern. But James, can I ask you to pick up any of those outstanding questions?
I think they were just comments really from Neil. If you want to come back in and ask anything further, but Neil was just mentioning about quality of life, keeping the streets clean, issues with black bin bags and seagulls. Obviously, we're well aware of from our time there. Don't make for clean streets. People sitting with their car engines running, idling is not great for air quality. Yeah, completely agree. I mean, they're not kind of planning. Not something that planning policies can tackle really, but certainly I think we've made. I mean, the plan does make reference to all sorts of aspects of the quarter, and I think we touch on things we'd like to see improved, but not necessarily things that planning policy can tackle. But I think that's where the JQDT and the Business Improvement District, that's more kind of in their realm of kind of management and kind of opportunities to change the way the kind of quarter moves around, people do things and businesses operate. Hopefully we can have some influence in the way people kind of treat the quarter from that sense. So I think it's probably more of a kind of a management. It's probably more in the JQDT and the bids kind of bag, that kind of stuff. But I think that those are, I mean, obviously, definitely key comments that and things that we need to be aware of. Certainly, air quality and in the city generally is something that's it's a big agenda item. So in the future, something the city and the quarter might tackle is the opportunity to pedestrianise some streets, or just increasing the opportunity for or more kind of giving more of the street over to pedestrians might be something that we could look at in a kind of future revision of the plan, or some targeted interventions with SIL money. So there's opportunities to tackle those kind of things with kind of projects on the ground. Matt's asked if sorry,
James,
go on. Yeah,
interject. From a planning point of view, we can make sure that no property is allowed to go through without an area for bins to be held.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, any car parking spaces should have access to electricity, so you can use an electric car.
Yeah,
I mean, we're lucky enough. We got into a development and managed to convince our developers to actually put an electric point in for us. But most other people, post will just be too expensive for people to do. So that should be a given going forward, that all parking spaces have access to electricity and bins.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I know the City Council are quite hot on in their own kind of the application of their own policies. So combined with the plan, it's something that developers should be required to do. Absolutely agree. And certainly bin stores is an absolute must, a given that any development should have effective bin storage. And that's something, if it was lacking, again, that the consultation committee would pick up, and we'd expect residents who are interested in looking at planning applications should pick up as well. So definitely some good comments there. Matt's asked what happens if the neighbourhood plan doesn't get implemented. That would obviously be pretty disappointing. But we would just continue it as is. Basically, it would be a continuation of the application of the existing Birmingham development plan, and then any future policies that come in, and obviously the planning reforms to see if they come through. But we just continue as is. John has asked how much influence does the plan have on parking? Interest is, as I've seen, some strong opinions for or against recent changes introduced in the area. I don't know what those changes are, but Dave, the plan on parking, I think, probably takes a cue from the existing parking standards in the Birmingham development plan. I don't think it's a specific. We haven't got any targeted policies on development, parking provision.
With the exception, sorry, James, to cut across, but with the exception, obviously, of underutilised land.
That's
being exploited for surface car parking, which contributes only to the pockets, obviously, of the people that are renting it out. But there have been too many instances, obviously, of sites not delivering more, which is what they can do. But I think you're right. And we can check this, but I think it will just align with the parking standards set out in the BDP.
And there's a targeted policy on vacant car parking on vacant land, and we've all seen the surface car parking areas that on obvious sites that really should be developed. So that the plan has a targeted policy on that to try and
I think
encourage their development.
Sorry to cut across, James, but just what's in my head, it'll be interesting, and others who are obviously living and breathing the quarter right now. I'm currently a visitor, not as of the recent month or two, but there's clearly change on the ground, cycle lanes, the routing of traffic, etc. There are things being experimented with, explored in the current circumstances, and I suppose it's an interesting question for us about whether we capture any of the in this plan any of the early successes of that, whether we want more to happen, less to happen. So it's something that we should take away in terms of particularly around transport movement, connectivity, which is a key feature of our plan anyway.
Can I come in on that one?
Please do.
I will declare my interest because I work for Transport West Midlands. So, although in the innovation team, not quite in cycle lane stuff, I think I've seen some interesting conversations in Facebook. I think a lot of it's come down, and I live in Heritage Court, and I wasn't aware of any of this was happening. So I think a lot of it is actually that I think the council unfortunately didn't consult that well about it. But I know there's obviously in the plan about nodes and all the sort of effectively creating more squares, which I support. Just I think we need to be careful about all this stuff, that that people are engaged with the plan and see that coming, and they feel they've got the comments on it. Because I think there's especially I think it's a lot of the shops and things, they're quite defensive about the parking. I can understand why, because they're probably not having the greatest of times at the moment anyway. So I think it's an engagement piece, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think also that some of the challenges as well is that people have, I think, around Albion Street, etc. I think people have got used to being able to park for free on the street, so they've had a bit of a shock now that some of that parking's been taken away. So
yeah. I know it's always been a hot topic. Not enough parking, too much parking, convenient parking for residents who don't have kind of on-site parking. And a lot of people obviously still have cars, but live in the city centre. And it's always been something I think the quarters had to grapple with. Certainly businesses have, I think a lot of strong views on parking and convenience and things. So it's a difficult one to manage. But certainly the interventions that have been made recently, it'll be very interesting to see how successful they are with the cycle provision, and certainly might give some ideas for how those integrate with our kind of nodes and our projects going forward. So yeah, definitely want to watch the emerging kind of movement agenda, and with the impacts of COVID and just general kind of work behaviours, and might see some alterations in how the streets are used and that kind of thing. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years to see how things pan out.
James,
okay,
it's 6:15.
Yeah, I was going to draw it to a close, but I've certainly got a dash. But yeah, thank you everyone for your contributions and for joining the session this afternoon.
Yeah,
it's been very good.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I hope you found some of it useful. I think we should probably just wrap up to say that there has been a huge amount of work that's gone in to get to this point, and a lot of good collaboration with the City Council. And I've heard some very positive words in the past by the leader of the council and others to say that they're committed to making this happen, which is good. Obviously, it needs resourcing, and then we need to see it being realised on the ground. But there's still some way to go before we get to that point. So really, I'd leave it at this point and urge everyone to continue to contribute. If there are questions that we haven't answered, we will come back and respond and place those responses somewhere. This will be on the YouTube as the other sessions have been, and therefore accessible. So if you want to watch it again, lucky you. And all that remains is to say, have a great evening. Keep safe, and thanks for bearing with us at the beginning while we got our act together.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks very much indeed. Cheers.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.